Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the RENNSPORT community events. It's been 2 weeks since the last one, and it will be 2 weeks until we have another one. But today we are at Hockenheim with what you can already see, the Praga R1 and the BMW M2 Cup. Very interesting combo, a very tiny high downforce car against a slightly chunkier low horsepower touring car. And yesterday we had the 2 hours Nordschleife. 2 days ago we had the first round of the RENNSPORT R1 starting. But what stays the same to yesterday is that Tim Ireland is alongside me in the commentary booth.
Hello, Lino. Hello, people on Twitch. How are you guys today? Yeah, this is a bit of a different race to what, especially yesterday's race with the GT3s at Nordschleife. But it's an interesting combo that I don't think we've tried before with the so tiny, tiny, tiny Praga and the quite gigantic M2 on track at the same time.
Well, in comparison, it really is gigantic in comparison to any other BMW. It's still relatively small, but yeah, it's very interesting indeed. It's kind of if you would compare to other classes you see racing against each other, it's a bit more like Hypercar against GT3 in terms of the difference with the cars. But
Yeah, I
probably
can
a
see
bit
that.
more drastic in this case, because BMW is of course a lot slower than a GT3, and the Praga is a lot slower than a hypercar. But the downforce levels on the Praga are very respectable indeed. We are right now in qualifying, and drivers are now getting onto their first timed lap. So let's take a look at, for example, Rohan den Hoed, one of the favorites, I'd say, in the Praga 1 class, but he has some tough competition. We overall have 5 Pragas and 10 M2s here on the server. And they can already see a very nasty characteristic, I'd say, with the Praga. It has an open differential and very long gear changes for a sequential car. So we will see the rear stepping out on those quite a lot of times. It's something you really need to get used to, but I know that Rohan is really enjoying this car. He had a lot of fun with it before. So let's see.
Yeah, Rowan's been putting some practice in with the Praga R1 before today, so he should definitely be one of the forerunners there. Julian Segur seems to be doing some pretty good lap times as well, so he might not have it all his own way.
This one is
As they
invalid, but
come.
it's definitely on a good pace. What will the first benchmark be? A 140.2. Good way to start. The BMWs will come across the line in just a bit to put in their first laps. So we see one of the favorites for that class, Dominic Lala. But we have some other very interesting name, because Maximilian Dehn is also in this class, coming on the final turn right now. And they put in a 151 flat. Maximilian Dehn, Dominic Lala a bit behind that. And Ali Zahir also in the BMW M2.
Yeah, we've got a fairly well-known grid right now for both classes. I think we know most of the drivers by name, even if some of them are annoyingly long.
Don't know who you could mean by that. As you watch Enrico Strigo, Please Don't Crash PC, or Sergio Bruninger from FDRT. Further in the stream, only named by Enrico Bruninger. Well, you could say Enrico's really exploiting the limits here, not only from the car, is he?
It's using all of the track and all of the name box.
Indeed.
But yeah, there are a couple of unknowns, but for the most part, we know the people who are racing, and they know each other quite well. Enrico getting a bit squirrely there.
You can also see the pace difference already between the cars. Of course, right now in qualifying, the drivers can't see each other. Everybody's out there in their private sessions, so the cars on track are only visually for us, so we can directly compare them. And we still got about 4 minutes left in this qualifying session. If you want to see live timings and all that kind of stuff, head over to the RENNSPORT app. You can get all the data in there that you would need for this. But it's quite close in the Praga class, actually. The thing with the Praga class is always the difference between race and qualifying due to its characteristics, but 5/10 between 3 cars in the Praga R1 is quite respectable, and Alexei Ivantsov is only 1.1 behind.
Yeah, it's quite a close field, which is good. I'm looking forward to seeing those guys racing. They've got to contend a bit, probably a bit more with the traffic. Although the M2 drivers will definitely have to keep an eye out for those little dwarf cars suddenly diving down the inside. They have a lot more corner speed than the M2s.
Yeah, I think the difference in the race will be very apparent very quickly. Dominik Ladler has driven down to a 51.2. Meanwhile, Rowan Den Hood put in a 39.3 as we speak, putting about a second from his competitors in that last lap. Dominik Ladler is edging closer to Maximilian Dehn. He just hit the wall into the Motordrome. "45-minute race here today, so a bit on the shorter side for RCEs. But what of course will be interesting for the Praga drivers, they don't have ABS. So
They don't, that is very true.
how will they cope with the fact over a 45-minute race? It is definitely possible, but once you lock up, you will always break back into that flat spot and it will get worse and worse. It's a snowball effect, and if you do that too early, if you overpush the car too early, have a lockup or create multiple small flat spots, which is also a possibility, then you might be in for a very tricky race.
Max Dean going half a second quicker than Dominik Ladler in his last lap, so the gap between first and second is now 0.539.
Ladler nearly losing it out of the hairpin.
Ali Zahir is a second and a half behind. Jason Gazelle 1.7. Piotr Zdybel is 2.4. David Baker is 3.2. And Radoslav is 6.5 seconds behind right now.
It's nice to see him back. I mean, yesterday he finished one of the toughest races he could face as the first race on the Nordschleife. And he's back today in the BMW M2 Cup. And Nico Breuninger might be on for an improvement here, but it's not good enough to dethrone Rowan Den Hood. But it seems like it will be an FDRT front row lockout.
Anson Filer's got a good lap time if you can manage to do a valid one. He's just invalidated all his laps so far. And there he is, putting it on third row and immediately getting demoted to fourth.
Well, Alizai meanwhile made his way up into second in class, that's 6th overall. Of course, he
The
will.
difference between Ali Zahir and Dominik Ladler was 0.002.
Indeed, it is. And that is. Well. I had a photo finish today. Or, well, should have had a photo finish today. And that was 8,000ths of a second. That's still 4 times as big. But right now we are waiting for the grid to start. or for the drivers to settle onto the grid. Could do for this one is actually go on board with one of the drivers. See the start from their perspective.
Fancy.
Yeah, we're getting fancy here today. On board with the 7-car of Piotr Zadalbe. Standing start again here today. And it will be tricky with the Praga to launch. I think that's out of the question. It should still be getting away from the BMW M2 quite quickly. Much less weight. And also mid-engine opposite to front engine. But the engines come back to life. You can see the red lights. Not here, see the red lights. And we go racing at Hockenheim. Pretty even start in the BMWs. Up front it's Ron and Hood, keeping his lead. Let's take a look at the BMW. Seems like there was no incident through turn 1. As they barrel down towards turn 2. Maximilian Dehn on the outside of Dominik Ladler, I believe.
Yeah, Nikolov just getting caught up a little bit with the M2s there, a bit slow off the start and unsure of how fast to take T1. But he's got a bit of a gap now.
Dominik Ladler was heavily compromised there, being side by side with Maximilian Dehn. In Praga, oh, it's Ivansov, and he managed to get out of the way just in time. Just has to get back onto the asphalt. Bit of contact there with the other Praga. Oh, and no love lost between the two of them.
No, that was a bit of an industrial move for the beginning of the race.
But it's... yeah, they're getting caught up by Maximilian Dehn and Alizar here. Who will probably be a bit annoyed by that, seeing as they are fighting with each other here. One of the BMW spun around in the background. Is that Piotr Zadalbe? Yes, indeed it is. Seems like there was contact on the front left. Julian Checo got past Enrico Bräuniger for P2 and is now hunting down Rohan Den Hoed. The three are only separated by 1.3 seconds after one lap. Dominik Ladler trying to make ground up.
Nikolov spun in the Praga and has gone back down to 11th place overall.
He just has to find his rhythm now.
Yeah.
Oh, Enrico Bräuniger lost quite a lot of time in the hairpin there. The hairpin is a very, very tricky part in this car. Because you have to keep it in a higher gear than you want to due to the long gear shift length. That can really throw you around, basically. Alizar having a very good exit out of the hairpin, though, compared to Maximilian Dehn.
In the GT3s coming up to the hairpin as well, you can really bang down the gears fast and use the engine braking to help you slow down. But if you try that in the M2, it will just lock the back end up.
David Baker trying to get past Jason Kizar for 9th. Jason also having a bit of a battered car on the right-hand side. I don't know if that was also contact with Piotr Zadalbe, because the rear right and the front left of the two cars match up quite a bit.
Bit of a giveaway.
And now Nikolov has to wait to find his way past the two. Maximilian Dehn still leading the M2 class. And Anson Filer, currently in the podium positions, he had a very good start.
He did, yeah, and he's been keeping a fairly decent pace so far. Dominic Ladler behind him has got a little bit quicker, so we'll close the gap up, but there is a bit of a gap between them right now.
Meanwhile, up front, Rondon Hood, 1.9 seconds to Julian Chicot. Slapping that tiny bit faster. Enrico Bräuniger lost out quite a bit to Chicot though, so he's down to 2 seconds of a gap. M2's always a bit sideways out of the hairpin. Of course, the interesting part will be in about 5 to 10 minutes when the Pragas will come around for the first time to put a lap on the BMW M2 Cup cars. And patience will be a key word in that. Nikolov seems to have had an off in Mercedes.
I think the people nursing their tyres in the Praga are going to be at a big advantage here, because you definitely don't want to have to stop for a pit in a 40-minute race.
Yeah, that would of course be, while not maybe devastating, put a huge blocker on your chances for podium or even the win. As we mentioned earlier, the ABS is probably the biggest factor for the Pragas, which of course the BMWs don't have to worry about. They have ABS, traction control, all that fancy stuff. In the Praga, you don't have that luxury. It's all down to the drivers.
Yeah, they are a very bare bones motor racing car. I'm sure some of you have probably seen the Praga Cup racing with many an influencer, shall we say, on YouTube at some point, and they are a crazy piece of kit that goes stupid fast. But they are a very bare bones car as well. There's not a lot of fancy bells and whistles on there. They have added a turbo, I think, since they first started racing them.
And they make for a great entry into the LMP kind of cars. They are not as powerful as the LMP cars, but they are still even lighter than that. As you said, very bare bones. I think David Baker... Oh, huge damage to the front right of his BMW. Behind him, that's Piotr Zdaibel. He's also suffering from damage early in the race. Dominic Ladler, only a few scratches on the front left. Nothing to really be worried about. And he is getting close to the rear end of Anson Filer.
Rowan de Herd already coming up behind some M2 traffic right now. Passing the number 15 car, which is Janis Gander.
Found his way through quite quickly, even though I don't know if I would have risked that. It's a very tricky part of the Hockenheim ring to go side by side through. Let alone in different speed cars.
He's got a fairly good cushion for this early in the race, so he's definitely shouldn't be in a rush to get past anyone.
McLaren couldn't quite find his way past Ensign Filer on this attempt. Praga race will definitely really come into form later on in this race in the long run. Who can keep their car in shape, who can keep it out of either the wall or another BMW. As Ronin Hood is now making his way past, I think, the number 7 car of Piotr Zadaibe.
I think so, yeah. But it was kept well out of the way, which we know Piotr Zadaibe does pretty much all the time. He's very respectful of the other drivers around him.
Oh, this time Dominik Ladler. Ensign Filer went very wide. Now we are side by side. I think Ladler should have him into the hairpin. Oh, he's still there.
Yeah.
Now can he get enough exit?
Ladler swinging wide, going for the switcheroo. Doesn't quite get the exit he needs.
He will have to wait another lap. Oh, Rowan den Hood
spun. I don't know if that was contact with one of the back markers. We'll try to find out for you.
Car in front of him is David Baker. Would be more unusual, let's say. Oh, and Rowan den Hood has spun again into Mercedes. Down to third. So new race leader, Julian Chicot. David Baker getting out of the way of the Praga there. And with that, the standings in the Praga Cup are basically turned upside down. David Baker lost the car there, coming out of the final turn. Gets it pointed into the right direction again.
No, Rowan did just get on the gas too early coming out of the hairpin, and it was entirely self-spin.
Yeah, we've talked about it earlier, how tricky the cars are. Now this time Dominic got forced wide by Ensign Filer. But I think Ensign is not really going to... But Dominic Lala also went onto the brakes there, so they're now going side by side into Mercedes. Ladler on the inside, preferable going into the left-hander. Oh, but there's contact between the two of them. And through goes Jason Kezar into third. Dominic Ladler emerging ahead of Ensign Filer, but I think Ensign Filer turned into early on Dominic Ladler there. And it's side by side for the lead as well.
Yeah, there's been some crazy Praga action in the last couple of corners. Those three are very close together, and I think they're just coming up to lap Nikolov.
Yeah, of course, Nikolov will have, or did get out of the way for Ronin Hood. He still has to let the other two through. Oh, but collects both.
Oh. Well, Enrico Breininger spun. I think he got on the brakes to try to avoid the contact, and that caused him to spin. He wasn't involved in any contact himself.
That's the thing that Julian Chicot actually may have spun out Alexei. Oh no, that is, I think, Nikolov. Sorry. Spun Nikolov out, just tried to get down the inside, being a bit too impatient, and basically causing the chain reaction. I mean, see, you are having a look, but I think that it was a bit...
Yeah, I'd say so.
Maybe just a bit too eager from Julian Chicot there.
But also, I think Nikolov could have left him a little bit more space there, for sure. It was definitely not all one person's fault.
Spoiler alert, most incidents in racing definitely are not 100% on a certain person.
That is very true.
Even though Drive to Survive does want you to think that. But what that caused is basically the order we had before. Rondon Hurt in front of Julian Chicot and Enrico Bräuninger with gaps in between.
Yeah, the gaps are fairly similar again as well.
This one
But
makes
at least the second and third place in the Praga have seen that Rowan de Herd isn't infallible. He's definitely capable of making mistakes. And there is still 30 minutes left to go. So it's not done and dusted just yet.
Oh, big sideways moment there for Rondon Hurt when trying to overtake Jason Kizar exiting turn 1.
Dived onto the curves to try and get around the outside, but of course the curves not known for their grip.
Well, you could say they made cars jump in in some other categories like the DTM back then. Dominic Lala closing in on Jason Kizar. It's for third in class. Of course, that position he wanted to have earlier when fighting Anson Feiler, but the contact between those two, letting Jason Kizar pass without much of a fight. And they're also being caught. I think that's... Oh, quite sure. Oh, Enrico Bräuninger has been to the pits. Currently in the pits.
Okay. Did he have a drive-through penalty then?
He definitely came to a stop. I think he might have gone in for tires after his huge flat spot moment in the incident with Chicot and Nikolov. Suspect he may have just come in to get fresh rubber. Because I can assure you, driving that thing with flat spots is not good for half an hour. And it won't get any better.
Julian Sakod managed to get past Ladler and Kazar fairly easily, so that hasn't caused too much of a disruption. Anson Feiler is catching up to Dominic Ladler now, though, so we've got a bit of a three-car train going on.
The pace of Anson Feiler is really surprising to me, though. He's doing a good job at the moment, keeping up with Dominic Ladler. Oh, goes wide here, though. Managed to not hit Dominic Ladler, which is a pretty good thing. But that will have cost him quite some time. And Dominic Ladler within 3/10 of Jason Kizar. If you can keep it there for the next Parabolica section, should be good to go past.
Yeah, Anson Feiler's a little bit further back now, so Ladler shouldn't have to worry about him too much immediately. But Jason Kazar is a bit of a cork in a bottle right now. Anson Filer dropping even further back there. He must have got a few bad exits.
Nose to tail. Going across the line.
Ladler deciding maybe not and backing off.
Yeah, being too close in turn 1 can leave huge risks, not only you going wide, but also in general if the person in front of you suddenly slows down, which may happen in a turn that you take. I think in BMW it should be 4th gear. That is really not a fun situation to be in. But if his exit was good enough...
Yeah, he's got a good run down Parabolica, as long as he can keep close enough to grab the slipstream. Not able to capitalize on it, I'm afraid.
Good exit again, though. Maybe he's going for it into Mercedes. In the background, we see Alexei Ivansov coming up to them. Of course, right now in 3rd, because I think that's what you wanted to start saying. Enrico Boining, of course, with his pit stop, dropping down to 4th.
Yep. That was exactly what I was going to say.
Indeed, there are people listening to other commentators, even in the realm of RENNSPORT. Maximilian Dehn coming up to put a lap on Janis Gander. Of course, the interesting thing between these two cars is also the fact that they are not massively different on the straight. Of course, the Praga does have a pace advantage, even though I'm not so sure about top speed, because the gear ratio on the Praga is quite low. So you top out fairly quickly, but you get to your top speed quicker than the BMW.
Yeah, it's more designed, I think, for the shorter circuits, what you might call a club racing circuit. So it does have a fairly short ratio gearbox and gets up to its top speed pretty quick. Obviously, the straight at something like Hockenheim, it's barely stretching the legs of the M2, to be honest, as far as gear ratios are concerned.
Yeah, very much so indeed. Dominik Ladler struggling big time though to get past Jason Kezar. Just can't get a good enough exit out of turns 2 and 3 to just drag by down on the Parabolica. And Jason is always having good enough exits.
Alexei Ivansov just span coming out of the hairpin behind this pack of 3 drivers. So that puts him a little bit more into Enrico Breininger's clutches than he was before.
Oh, Ladler going down the inside of Kezar into the motordrome section, catching the Canadian off guard and up into 3rd.
He did have a fair pace advantage on Jason Kezar before he caught him up, so we'll see if he starts to gap away, and that'll maybe make Anson Filer a bit more impatient with an overtaking attempt on Jason Kezar.
I can already see Ladler's building a bit of a gap to Jason. Ivansov not taking the chance here, which is a wise decision.
Yeah, it's an easy overtake after turns 2 and 3 for the Pragas to just put their foot down, even around Parabolica. They've got plenty of grip.
Let's take a look at our class leader in M2, Maximilian Dehn, with a fresh off the factory BMW M2. 5th overall and 14 seconds to Ali Zaya, who himself has now an 8-second lead to Dominik Ladler. Although he has some damage to the front left quarter panel and hood.
Yeah, Ladler's last lap was about half a second quicker than Ali Zahir's. So he had a bit of traffic to contend with to dominate Ladler, so we'll see next lap and check on their lap times to make sure they're about the same. But he is catching slowly.
Julian Chicot hovering around 10 seconds behind Rondon Hood. Of course, this will always fluctuate a bit depending on lapping maneuvers and track position. Because now Julian Chicot has free air in front of him, while Rondon Hood is coming closer to cars 14 and 7. And we also passed the halfway mark. We've seen one of the Pragas in the pits for tires. Question is, how does it look for the other 4 Pragas in this race? I think it's safe to say Nikolov isn't really in the fight for the podium here. A lap down on the other Pragas, but Ivansov, Chicot and Rondon Hood, how do their tires look?
They've all had a bit of an interesting moment. We saw Rondon Hood have 2 spins himself, so but he seems fairly comfortable with the tyres at the minute. You would have thought if he was going to come in and change them, he would have done it earlier.
It's a very situational
like you said right at the beginning. Yeah. And as you said right at the beginning of the broadcast, the flat spots do grow. The more you have them, the more you tend to lock up in that place on the tyre. So it all depends if he can deal with it.
I'm struggling a bit here through the Sachs curve. Anson Pfeiler.
I said I'd come back to you with some lap times for Ladler. Ladler's last lap was a 51.4. Ali Zahir's, I'm assuming he had some traffic involved because it's a 53.1. The gap between them is now 5 seconds.
I'm just having a look, and there may have been Alexei Ivansov on the lap for Ali Zahir.
Maybe, yeah.
But if he keeps the pace up, I think Ali Zahir we've seen before doing about 52s. If Dominic Lohler keeps into the 51s, he can still get close towards the end of the race.
Yeah, it's definitely not over for him right now. Ali Zahir just coming to lap one of the other M2s of Janis Gander.
Enrico Bräuniger within 30 seconds of Ivansov now.
Gander staying well wide and letting Ali Zahir through. Very nicely done.
Lots of confidence there by Ali Zahir as well, though, to dive down into Saxco. Getting a little flash even by the 15. Oh, and spinning. Gonna go spinning into the final 2 turns. Now has to wait. Gets out of the way. That's very neatly done there. And rejoins in front of... Who's that? Not quite sure. Might be Enrico Bräuniger. Is Enrico Bräuniger?
Number 6. It was Enrico Bräuniger. That was difficult to get my tongue around.
Well, be happy that you don't say the full name he's selected.
So that lap, obviously not a great one for Enrico because he had to slow down at the end there to avoid running into an M2. But Alexei Ivantsov's last lap was a 42.9. Julian Sakura had a bit of a spin at the end of the hairpin again and only managed to do a 48.4. Rowan de Herd streaking from the front right now, doing 139s with some clean air.
Seems like he's really well accustomed to the car. He's getting very confident, actually taking a lot of curb in places where I wouldn't take a lot of curb with it. Of course, the car runs very low. Oh, big drift there, though. But the car runs very, very low to the ground. It's very easy to bottom out, especially over those orange curbs, and still he's taking full advantage of them, exiting the hairpin, for instance. Almost feeling right at home.
Yeah, once he'd heard of the event, he decided fairly early on he was going to drive the Praga. And I know he has been doing some practice in it. And I think it's showing.
Anson Filer back within 4/10 of Jason Kizar for 4th in class. So now get overtaken by Vandenhout. Of course, the Praga doesn't give off a huge amount of slipstream, but every little bit will help Jason Kizar here. Because it also looks like Anson Filer had a decent exit.
And if you want to get a good exit, that's the corner you want it from, really.
Turns 2 and 3 can be quite tricky, I'd say. But the very cool thing about it is, depending on what kind of car you drive, with the Praga and the BMW, it's kind of similar, but depending on the car you drive, you can take such a different line through there. It's almost like Nürburgring Mercedes Arena. Because with the Praga especially, you want to keep the speed up high. On Jason Kizar's spins, I couldn't see if there was contact. I don't think there really was, but...
I don't think there was. It was difficult to see from our angle.
We'll check probably later on, but... yeah, with the Praga, you want to keep the speed up high because you don't really have a gear that fits the corner perfectly. So you just go the long way around towards the curbing on the left-hand side and just flick it back with the downforce. But in the GT3, for instance, you try to straight line it out, so you get nowhere near as close to the left-hand curb as with the Praga. You probably take a line more closer to what Enrico Bräuniger did here right now. But if we take a look at Vandenhout here, we get a bit more outward, and there we can see it. Using all the track available, just keeping those RPM high. You said previously, those cars do have a turbo nowadays. And indeed, there seems to have been contact between Filer and Kizar.
Yeah, I don't know if Kizar slowed down a bit more than Filer was used to coming into that corner, or he missed his braking point, but they definitely got very close. It's difficult to tell from the replay, to be honest.
Well, whatever the reason, Jason Kizar back to 5th in class, Anson Filer up to 4th. I think that's also the order in which we qualified, if I remember that correctly. Protozalbe, meanwhile, by the way, up into 10th overall, that's 6th in class after his early spin.
Yeah, positions 1 to 6 are in the qualifying order.
Wait, Well, you might look at it and think
Gander.
it's super boring, but I mean, it was upside down for a good chunk of the time.
That's in the M2 class. In the Pragas, then Julian Shakur's lost 2 places from where he qualified.
I'm sure you mean Enrico Boinica with that. Who's right now
I mean Enrico
fighting
Boinica.
Nikolov. Oh, big drift by Boinica there.
He is carrying the extra ballast of that giant username, though. Each character in your username adds a kilo to your car. Remember that. Well, Rowan de Hoer just did a very big drift coming into turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6.
That's why I usually have a track map on a second monitor.
I've run out of monitors.
Me too, that's why I don't have a track map anymore. But I used to have it. It's interesting, Nikolov in the Praga has struggled to really get away from Maximilian Dehn, the class leader of BMW M2 Cup. But on the other hand, he's also not losing out to him. It's maybe a bit annoying for Maximilian Dehn.
Yeah.
But that gap is staying as is. Meanwhile, the gap between Ali Zahir and Dominic Lala has come down to 3.2 seconds. But with only 9 minutes left to go in this race, can be tricky.
They're running very, very similar lap times right now. Ali Zahir's last lap was a 51.6. Dominic Lada's was a 51.58. So basically the same lap time.
Oh, Lala nearly losing the car if they happen, and that will lose him a good amount of time again. Meanwhile, Alexei Ivantsov still running solidly here in third.
Yes, Goku, I do need an extra monitor. I only have 3. I need more. More!
I don't even have space to put up another one, to be honest.
I could find somewhere.
Ah, that's a good point. Well, in all fairness, I have the 3 monitors and the tablet and my phone. Down the inside of turn 1 goes Julian Chico on Ali Zahir. Very bold move to do.
Yeah. Well, I believe we were talking about Julian Chico yesterday. He's one of our more bold move kind of regular drivers.
Yeah, that's how you can really put it. Of course, peak was the slipstream battle with Ali Zahir on the Nordschleife in GT4, which we were talking about yesterday a lot. But it's also stuff like this, just lobbing it on the inside. You shouldn't always do that, and I think he knows that. But Ali Zahir, of course, will also have seen that in this case. And these drivers know each other at this point. So I think in the Praga class, meanwhile, Nikolov has parked his car. But Alexei Ivantsov, for example, isn't a name I think many are recognizing from our drivers. But after this race, I'm sure people go like, oh, he did well in this race, right? I can really race him. And that's how you build up
Yeah.
yourself over time. Oh, and nearly spins.
Oh,
But well done there, keeping the car under control.
yeah, it was good car control, because when these things spin, they spin. They do not stop. So he did really well to keep control of that.
Oh, but
Oh,
too hot again. See what the gap will be to Enrico Bräuninger, because this will now be interesting maybe for the last 5 minutes of this race. The thing with the Praga is, you said it's very tricky to drive. The reason for that being that open differential. Now, if you don't know what an open differential is, basically your wheels, when you go through a turn, they need to spin at different speeds, because the outward wheel always have to travel a longer distance than the inside one. And in most racing cars, let it be GT3, GT4, hypercar even more so, you have limited slip differentials. That means the difference of the speed the tires can have is limited to, I don't know, 20, 30, 40%, whatever you buy in terms of kit. But an open differential is what you have in pretty much all normal road cars, because also the cheapest to produce, but those can basically rotate completely independent from each other. You can have one wheel stationary and the other one rotating at maximum speed, for instance. Which is good for cornering, because of course the wheels can turn at the rate they need, but making the rear inherently unstable. If you put down the power, you basically don't quite know which wheel will receive how much power. And that's what making them so hard to drive. Praga, with the turbo especially, you have that turbo punch. And that can really make it tricky. But that's also when the ABS, or the lack of ABS rather said, is not that bad, because you can just lock it down on the brakes. Some terminology you may have heard in NASCAR or something. Locking it down is basically full onto the brakes, because if all four wheels are locked, the car can't really spin any further. It will just slide out in the direction it's traveling already.
yeah, other notable race cars that use a locked rear end are probably the Aussie V8 Supers.
Yeah, very true. I mean, generally the more horsepower car, the more diff lock you also want to have to make it predictable. It's not
Yeah.
as easy as that, but a very cheap way to build home-built drift cars is of course just welding the diff together. Which basically means you take the open diff and connect the two. Oh, and Enrico Browning are really struggling bad out there. He's lost about 10 seconds this lap to Ivansov again. And that is, I think, Julian Schick. No, it's Werner Hood putting a lap on Enrico Bräuninger. And getting very close there to Gunn there. But yeah, you weld the diff. The diff is basically 100% locked then. With the disadvantage, you can't really drive through any turns anymore. So, if you're thinking about it, don't do it if you plan to drive that car on the road. It is not a pleasure to drive. And yes, it would be Ivansov's first podium in an RCE. I think it's his first RCE overall.
Yeah, he's definitely had a good showing for his first race here. His pace has been pretty good. He's been fairly consistent. He's been well behaved around the traffic.
No real close fights left on the track. Dominic Lala was able to close in on Alizar a bit again, but it won't be enough. Because Vernon Hood will start the final lap of this race. think it's a very tricky race for the Praga drivers because you have to manage a lot of stuff for the BMW drivers. I wouldn't say it's an easy race, but you can concentrate more on just getting not being involved in any incident with the Pragas while still continuing your fight with the other BMWs. But for the Praga, you can't simply avoid any situation. We've seen it with the Chico, Bräuniger, and Nikolov incident. Bräuniger not able to get out of the way because just locking without ABS and being collected in that instance. That can easily happen with the M2. I don't think we have really seen any instances with Pragas and M2s being catched onto each other.
No, not really. The M2 is a fairly predictable car. Yeah, it's very kind of momentum based when you're racing it. It's very much about maintaining your corner speed. So once you pick a line to go into a corner, you're pretty much dictated to be on that line for the entire corner. And I think most of the guys out there who are driving the Pragas have driven the M2 before, and they understand what line it's going to take. So they're pretty good at just not taking that line.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it as well. But Vandenhoed out of the final turn, across the line. It's his first RCE win as well, I think. And
I think so, yeah.
I think that was quite the dominant fashion he put in today. Not without mistakes, in all fairness, but keeping that car on track for so long. That is a very good performance there by the Dutchman. Maximilian Dehn, 16 seconds to Ali Zaher. Not sure if you will say it was a boring race, but was definitely a well-executed race performance again.
Any race you win is a good race, surely.
Most of the time. But yeah, that number one, of course, being there for a reason. He's one of the very few platinum drivers alongside Dominic Lala, who was side by side with him for the start of the race and then was just shuffled down. Coming across the line, Julien Chicot finished in second in the Praga class. Aliza will finish second in the BMW M2 class, coming around the final turn, giving us a flash of the light. And Dominic Lala is going to complete the podium. And Alexei Ivantsov, his first RCE and a first podium in his class as well. Solid race performance. Last car on track will be Anson Feiler, who I think had the most eventful race of all of the drivers here today.
Yeah, his BMW doesn't quite show how eventful his race has been today. Just got a bit of crumpling on one of the door panels.
Very well. But that shall be it for today. I really enjoyed the race. I really like multi-class, as some of you might know. And I think Praga and M2 is definitely a very interesting combination. For the next
Yeah, I
RCE,
think you've...
one car staying the same. You want to take a guess?
I'm going to guess M2.
Correct. I mean, maybe you've read it anyway before. But yeah, do you have any final words or anything you want?
No, it was a really good race. Thanks for everyone who took part. There were some new guys who did pretty well. There were the old guard who were also their usual fantastic selves. Thanks for entertaining us. I hope you enjoyed the cast.
With all that said, now for the final time this week, thank you all for watching. And until next week on Friday with R1, on Saturday with RCL, the second half of Season 5 beginning. Until then, enjoy and good night.
Goodbye.